Foreman. I'm the CEO at Socialsuite. Excited to be here today for one of our exciting sessions where we are going to be running a fireside chat and with our guest today, Kai Martin at the Pasha Group. And so why today is so important is because one of the critical sectors in our world today is the transportation and logistics sector. Plays a pivotal role around our supply chains around the world, and given growing pressures to operate more sustainably, the sector itself is going through a number of different changes and navigating through quite a complex set of challenges, ultimately trying to keep our logistics industry moving along. And so Kai is right in the center of that. And what we'll be doing today is, after introductions, looking at the logistics sector and zooming out to really understand the major changes that this sector is going through and how climate change and sustainability is having an impact on the sector. And then we'll be zooming in to learn more about Pasha Group's sustainability journey. So excited to have you on today, Kai. Maybe if we could start with an introduction about yourself and ultimately how you ended up as the Chief Sustainability Officer at the Pasha Group.
Yeah, thank you very much, Seth. Good to be here with you and talk on this critical subject. So I have been with Pasha Group for 15 years, and I have been in the transportation industry for almost 30 years, 29. I started at the California Maritime Academy, got my Coast Guard license to sail, and ended up working most of my career shoreside. And so I really just practiced in transportation for a long time. That's how I came to Pasha, working in pretty much every one of the business units of the company, which is a good strength if you're going to be in sustainability, working with all of the different business units. And as far as my sustainability background, I've always been, passionate about sustainability. I think I joined Sierra Club like in my early teens. And there was probably a couple other things I was doing back then. And for the last 20 years, I've been doing things in like my city or my community that in terms of like their sustainability committee or those types of things. And how do we get to here with Pasha? In 2021, the CEO, George Pasha, who leads our company and is part of the family. We're a family-owned operation. We sat down and we talked about what were things that we're doing well and what were things we could do a little bit better. And what we found with sustainability is that different business units had different initiatives they were doing. They were all, sort of low-hanging fruit, positive to the bottom line, very early, very easy to get some revenue. But there was nothing enterprise-wide that we were doing at that time. And so the decision was at that time, George said, well, let's have a sustainability policy and let's create a roadmap. And Kai, you get to wear that as one of your hats and go. And from that, early beginning, we'll talk a little bit about some of the approaches to the roadmap and that type of thing. But that was how I ended up where I am at now, 4 years ago. So that's
fantastic. It. And before we were coming on, you were talking about this entrepreneurial story about Pasha Group and how it got started right after World War II or around World War II. Maybe we can just give the audience a quick summary of how the company got started, and then just a high-level overview of what the organization does today as a business.
Okay, yeah. The Pasha family has always been very entrepreneurial, and the George II, we're currently led by George IV, but George Pasha II saw an opportunity. They operated a gas station in San Francisco near Fort Mason. Fort Mason was where all the U.S. troops were going to Japan and Korea and other places in the Pacific. And those troops needed to leave their car somewhere, and hopefully their car would start up when they got back. So the Pasha family saw this opportunity. They said, drop your car at our gas station. We'll put it on a truck and we'll haul it to a parking lot somewhere. We'll maintain it so it might start up when you get back, and charge a little fee for that. And from that early beginning became the Pasha Group that we are today, where, we're operating 8 ships right now for 5 of our own for our own business, and 2 for the government and 1 for another commercial provider. And we have maybe 5 trucking fleets, multiple warehouses around the country. We operate many ports and terminals on the West Coast and Hawaii, those types of things. So we're a very diversified logistics company today, and several thousand employees on any given day. So humble beginnings to where we are today, and that's a little bit of the flavor. We handle we're a large portion of the Hawaii trade lane between the U.S. West Coast and Hawaii, and that's where a lot of our shipping is. But we also, like I mentioned, do a lot of port and terminals. So, there's a 30% chance that the car you're driving now came through one of our ports on the West Coast. We discharge a lot of the steel that's on the West Coast and a lot of other commodities. So we're making it happen, helping get those things on the shelves for you. So that's it.
Love that. That's great. So now let's kind of jump into the first part of our conversation, which is zooming out. And we're going to talk a bit about the logistics and transportation sector, and ultimately how climate change and sustainability is having an impact on the sector. So starting out with more macro trends, in your view, how is climate change already reshaping the logistics and transportation sector globally, and what are those general external pressures that you're seeing?
Yeah, good topic. I'm going to start. There's multiple things that are driving that, but one of the biggest is business risk, right? So what is the risk to business? And that's where we get into climate adaptation or climate resiliency. Some climate mitigation can be viewed as optional, right? Do we have to reduce our emissions? Do we not have to? But there's no question as to whether your business needs to be able to operate in a degraded environment tomorrow as a result of flooding or a hurricane or a wildfire, you name it. And so that is one of the bigger drivers in transportation. Is your warehouse in a place that's going to get flooded every year? That's probably not a good place for your warehouse, right? Are your trucking lanes and your trucking vendors in areas that are going to be affected by different events, or do they have a diversified footprint and they're going to be able to provide alternate routing for different things? So I look at business risk as one of the biggest drivers that's pushing transportation to do something, because if you don't, you cannot operate tomorrow kind of scenario. So I mentioned some of them, flooding, the extreme freeze kinds of things that happen, hurricanes, wildflowers, power outages, extreme heat. All those are things that are starting to affect us in the United States. Extreme heat is probably the newest one, where there's starting to be regulations around what can our workers be in and how hard can they work and under certain conditions, and what kinds of things do we need to help do for them, which are all important things. We want to keep people safe and make sure that they're happy on the job and that they can do the work. So all those are different places, whether it's trucking, ports and terminals, rail, aircraft, right? We're seeing those types of delays with weather-induced things. Those are all big drivers. And then one of the things, sort of local change in climate, if we look at the Panama Canal, it's a great example, right? Nobody expected for them to have the drought that they had and limit ship traffic. And so what you had is you had longer supply chains and ships getting backed up trying to go through the canal. And then you had a bunch of ships that didn't want to pay for it and didn't want to wait. And they were going around South America, which meant that they had to add more ships into service. So those types of disruptions are being driven by climate, and were not foreseen probably 10 years ago, but that's forcing the supply chain and business and transportation to look at things differently. And what is my risk? How diversified is my supply chain? How resilient is it? Will it bounce back? So that's one of the biggest drivers. And then the other thing I was going to just hit on is, there are regulations. We're seeing, probably around almost 50 countries in the world now that have some type of reporting requirement, or that's coming soon. If you include the EU, there's about 22 plus the EU, not including the state of California. I'll talk a little bit about those later. And separate from that, you do have some customer demand. their customers aren't necessarily willing to pay a premium for it, but there is an expectation that you are doing something. And the majority of our customers are asking for a sustainability update. They're asking for me to put together, or my team to put together, something that explains what Pasha is doing for sustainability. So they care. And in some cases, they're scoring us. And in some cases, we can't even apply for a tender or offer a proposal or be compliant if we don't hit a minimum score on sustainability. So it is becoming the cost of doing business to some degree coming forward.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think
Lots of trends.
Yeah.
A lot going on. That super interesting, and that kind of leads us into more when you think again at sector level. Those are the macro trends, and then how do those general trends impact companies operationally? Now you touched on some of them, but when you think about it from what are the most significant sustainability challenges in the sector, and when you think about the value chain and the areas around, for example, trying to decarbonize certain areas of the logistics and transportation sector, how it is at a sector level, how do you view the sector trying to handle this?
Well, it's very challenging. So within the transportation side, the units themselves are the largest source of emissions, and so the best thing you can do is either change the fuel or change the equipment. So whether it's aircraft, vessels, trucks, rail, even pipelines and facilities, what can you do to control those emissions or reduce those emissions? So that's the biggest opportunity area, but it's also very hard to decarbonize. We'll talk a little bit about that. When we talk about the emissions area, it's such an order of magnitude that it's staggering. If we have an aggressive waste reduction program, we can reduce maybe 0.4% of our emissions as a company. If we just take one of our truck fleets and switch them over to biodiesel or maybe renewable diesel, we can get a 7 to 10% reduction with just that one switch over to our company's entire GHG emissions. We're making a lot of investments in our equipment and our fleet. We're switching over to different fuels. There's a longer term horizon picture as far as natural gas as a fuel in transition. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But there's a lot to be done there. And when we talk about these assets, planes operate for quite a long time. Ships operate a long time. Our ships are between 3 and 40 years old, and they will continue to operate for another 15 to 25 years. So, and our company primarily is in the U.S. trade, where we have a U.S. built ship with American crewmen. And a U.S. built ship is maybe 4 or 5x, 5 times the cost of building it in a foreign yard. So we have a higher construction cost to try and replace that equipment. So if people say, well, why don't you just build some new ships? Well, it's not really commercially feasible. These are long time assets. So whatever you're going to do, you need to decide on something today that you think will be around tomorrow, that you'll be able to get fuel for tomorrow and into the foreseeable future. And that's why one of the things we've done for ours is we have 3 of our ships that are currently natural gas powered, which isn't, which is cleaner, but still just a stepping stone in that direction. But as you get into bio LNG and then you get into synthetic natural gas, then you're really getting to somewhere around 97, 99% potential reduction of emissions, and you don't have to change the engine, you don't have to change the vessel, you just continue to use that same asset and you're just switching fuels. So those are the types of things that the transportation industry is looking at. What are the drop-in fuel options right now? Can I switch to bio? Is renewable diesel available? Is some other type of renewable source available at scale and where the price is appropriate? But those are some of the challenges. Is the price there where it needs to be? Do we have the technical competency? A lot of the crew members and shipyards, et cetera, don't have the technical competency in this new emerging equipment. It's hard to even get an engine. About 50% of the ships in the world being built right now are dual fuel engines, and you can get a ship delivered in a year, and it might take you 3 years to get an engine. So there's this rapid scale up that's happening, and if you need some spare parts for that engine, good luck. you're gonna have to go raid a shipyard. So it's emerging, it's new, and the rest of everything hasn't caught up with it. The people supply chain hasn't caught up, the parts supply chain hasn't caught up, and the regulations haven't caught up. The regulations are years and in some cases decades behind where they need to be able to produce a ship tomorrow that can operate, be approved to operate in various ports around the world on, let's say, methanol or ammonia or something else like that. So there's all new emerging things that's creating new challenges.
So to touch on one thing you just mentioned, I think you said 50% of newer ships are effectively, I'm not a shipping expert, but hybrid ships. So they can go, they can both use fossil fuel and other types of biofuels. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah. So they're essentially, drop in ready. So they might burn on day one, just marine diesel or some other type of fuel oil. And then you can start using a blend at some point if you want, or you could start, and so maybe you have a pilot fuel that's the diesel and you have something else that's burning with it. But you can start migrating towards, natural gas, if you will, or maybe, methanol or some other type of drop-in alternative fuel. Now there's tank considerations or storage things that go into that, piping systems. All those may need to be adjusted depending on what fuels you're going to. But the engine, the main plant, is being designed to be flexible with what the fuels of the future are going to be, because these are long range assets that cost a lot of money. So
yeah. And is that a fairly recent change in how engines are being built in the last few years, or has this been going on for much longer than that?
No, it's a massive shift. If you looked at 20, I'm just looking at one of my little graphics here or something, but 2020, it was around 10 or 11% of the industry of the builds were being built that way. So just in 5 years, or the number I gave you with the 50% number was 2024. So just in 4 or 5 years, it went from 10 to 50%. And diesel,
that's significant.
pure diesel ships are continuing to go down, and will be below 50% of all new builds around the world. So it's a pretty rapid change. So when people say, "Oh, shipping's not changing," it's like this is a seismic shift for shipping. So it is happening. Just not the pace everyone wants to see.
I did not know that, and that's a major change. So that's super interesting. That's great. And so moving into you touched on regulatory and how regulatory changes are impacting the sector. Can we just dig in a little bit more? There's, of course, the California laws that are coming up, SB 253, SB 261, that are asking companies above 500 million to identify their climate risk. You have SB 253 asking companies to identify and disclose their emissions. And then you have the International Maritime Organization has certain targets as well. So when you think about all these regulatory changes facing the industry and the sector, has that also been helping propel the industry forward, or has it been more kind of just because of there's so many different regulations, it's been more of a challenge to navigate?
Well, the regulations are still evolving, and that does make it challenging. The IMO at least rallying around something, and that's supposed to be approved, I believe, this month. The IMO MEPC will be approving what they came up with earlier in the year, and certain countries are fighting against that. But at least if the IMO comes out with one standard for everyone to shoot for, one goal, then everything can be brought in line. If you're trying to build ships that will comply with the EU's requirements, and it's different than China's requirements, that's going to make everything harder. So the more that we can move to an international standard, the better. The EU has Fuel EU. They have the ETS. They have a couple different things that are going that are influencing things. The EU actually has a less aggressive plan than the IMO. It has sort of like some stair steps.
Shocking, Kai.
Shocking. It is. People were upset with the EU.
EU's so is the most complex regulations. So
Yeah, when they came out with it, everyone was upset. And then when everyone saw what the IMO ended up with, they said, "Oh, well, you know what? We realized the EU better." So
wow.
anyway, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Um, for if you don't do something in terms of the EU and those carbon tax assessments start, you start having to pay those tonnage taxes and stuff, it it will cost you a significant amount if you don't start changing your fleet around. And they allow, and so ocean ship owners are switching their fleet around, and they'll start putting their hybrid vessels, they'll start putting their methanol vessels, their natural gas vessels, they'll start putting everything that they can into the European trade, so that they can also get a pool where they have a certain number of ships, and so it makes them compliant as a fleet. Um, but that is going to be driving a lot. There's I think the ETS was several $billion last year that was made, and it's just going to keep going up in terms of what the EU is making from this
Hmm.
trading scheme. So as they see that money come in, they're probably going to be less and less likely to repeal or go back against it, and it's going to keep driving the business. So that's probably one of the biggest drivers. The IMO is going to affect that, and if the IMO doesn't happen, then some other countries that carry some weight are going to make that happen. Could be China. But yeah, I mentioned earlier, there's about 49 countries in the world that have some type of reporting standard, whether it's with the EU or SASB, IFRS, or something else, or the state of California ones. And they're looking at greenhouse gas and climate risk. Different rules are looking at different things, and different countries are considering those.
Yeah,
But
and Gresby as well. You brought up in the past about how I guess as a organization has to manage both from a real estate standpoint and then also from a general sector specific standards like from SASB and others that you're kind of you have a you're involved with a lot of the different frameworks and regulations that are out there.
yeah, and our company, we're private, so we don't have to comply with certain things, but we don't have to do SASB per se. But if it's becoming the global benchmark, then we will still end up getting measured against it. So we might as well understand where we sit with it. And like you mentioned with Gresby, if we're looking to get some funding, maybe even some green funding to help pay for some of these initiatives, they are going to be looking at us at our Gresby score, or they're going to be looking at how we're doing as a company. They want to make sure they have a good partner.
Absolutely. So moving into technologies, which I think is a really fascinating area of the sector, particularly from a sustainability lens. What are you seeing that's happening right now in the logistics and transportation sector as it relates to the new technologies?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, fuels is the most important in terms of the alternative fuels. Green methanol, any of the green fuels. So seeing cheaper ways to produce that at scale is where it's at, and there's multiple ways to now produce hydrogen, and that kind of keeps getting lower and lower as they improve that. But the fuels is a big piece, and then you look at like and battery electric trucks or other types of options along those lines. We're also seeing routing, digital twins, energy efficiency. Those types of things will end up improving your efficiency, reducing your fuel burn, reducing your emissions by you doing that the right way. The probably the biggest one is the fuels. The next biggest are probably enhancements. So there's a lot of enhancements for ships. Air lubrication is becoming a very talked about thing for ship owners because it's a relatively easy augment when the ship goes to shipyard next time. You can rudder bulb caps. There's all these
So
things you can do.
what's air lubrication for those? They're not in the shipping category. What's the air lubrication?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So that's essentially where your vessel is going to be riding on a plane of bubbles in the ocean.
Oh,
So there's something that's actually putting bubbles underneath your vessel's hull as it's going through the water, and it
oh
reduces
wow.
the drag of the ocean on your vessel. So we're looking, in the EPA has Smart Way. There's various enhancements for trucks that different companies have been making for years to reduce drag and improve aerodynamics and performance of trucks. they're all getting better miles per gallon than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So those types of technologies where you can make enhancements to existing equipment, because these are long-lived assets, are really important, and people are looking at them seriously. If you have one of these long assets and you invest in, voyage routing and maybe putting some solar on your vessel and putting a wind rotor or some other type of wind product on your vessel, and making other improvements, you might be able to reduce your emissions by 20%. That's real money, and that's real in terms of fuel savings, and that's a pretty good impact with an existing asset with a relatively low cost, relatively low impact to implement. So that's where I get excited about technology, because some of these are cutting edge. Anti-fouling is one of them, and that's and I'm speak for ships. That's where you prevent all the gunk from getting on your hull and sort of slowing you down. And every 5 years when you go to shipyard, they might scrape it all off. But how do you keep your ship performing well? Because stuff starts growing on it within about 24 hours of it getting back in the water. And there's really innovative little robots that can scrape your hull as you're sailing through the ocean and stuff like that. There's some really neat technologies out there. So and some of these things that, new ships that come out, you wouldn't buy a car that didn't have air conditioning. That should just be standard. So at some point, when they're building trucks and they're building trailers and they're building ships, it's going to be standard that they all come with these basic items, because nobody would want to buy a ship or a truck or an asset that doesn't have those items. It's just going to be a standard package. So that's some of the stuff that we're going to start seeing happen just as a regular, which will drive the industry in a good way.
I was going to ask about the enhancements, because at Climate Week at the Climate Campus at the Javits Center, there was a huge display of those sails that they're putting on the big ships. And I was going to bring that up to you, because I was curious if you felt that really had legs, or if it was just more of a test initiative that they're trying to see will work.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ones that people have been looking at for years. One of the early ones was like a kite or something that would come out in front of your vessel. Not that easy to use or realistic, depending on your air currents and stuff. There's ones that have been put out more recently, which are essentially just a large flat sail that sticks up from the ship somewhere and then can be folded down when it's handling cargo operations. There's a few ships that have been built that way. And they have seen, 4 to 7% reduction in emissions and, in fuel savings. And if the ship has got a decent amount of life to it, then it's probably worthwhile, right? If the payback's 7 years and you're going to have the ship 15, let's do it. There's some that are telescoping sails. There's also ones that are these rotors that just spin, and those don't take up much space. But they may or may not be that effective depending on what your trade lane is. So there's a new company, Bella, that essentially has an oversized sailboat that would engage in international commerce. I think the challenge there is scale, right? We have the largest container ships in the world are carrying 20,000 TEU. If that Bella ship's only holding a few hundred, then you'd have to have a lot of those ships to meet the international demand. So how does this work? And those ships still have to get to ports and go under bridges, right? And in the background of my wallpaper, you can see the Golden Gate Bridge. The biggest ships in the world are just barely scraping underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, right, or the Bay Bridge right now on the Golden Gate Bridge. So how will all these other things work? They need to be, and we're looking for one of our ships. We have a roll-on, roll-off carrier. It carries cars. And we have been doing some investigation to see if one of the telescoping wind products would tie out as far as financially and performance wise. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if it's worthwhile. But there's a lot of options, and every ship owner should be evaluating if there's things that they could be doing. And to your point, and the earlier point, those will become standard. At some point, it won't be experimental. That's just standard stuff. You want the wood paneling? Great. Or you want the spoiler? Great. Well, now we'll just put this wind rotor on up by your bow and it's fine. So anyways, that is coming. So
A lot of great ideas. I guess to your point, the practicality of it is a challenge, but more likely we'll see more of those sales in the future, it sounds like.
Yeah, some version of it or something that uses wind to help either propel the vessel or to generate energy and therefore reduce engine load.
Yeah. So now let's kind of shift the conversation and zoom into Pasha Group. And it would be great to maybe start out, and you kind of touched on this earlier, but to dig in a bit more around what really sparked the Pasha Group's real investment into sustainability, if there was a spark, and or maybe it was a longer term issue. But if there was a spark, can you talk about it and what really drove that initial action to get started?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that what we saw was different business units were doing things based upon who that business leader was, and based upon essentially who walked in their door and made a pitch to them, and whether it tied out financially or not. And so that we, George Pasha and myself and other people in the company, we could see that that approach wasn't going to work long term. It was going to become increasingly important to our customers, to potential lenders, to our employees, and to the ports and the other stakeholders that we work with. We have a big operation in the Port of San Diego, and the Port of San Diego has one of the most aggressive marine clean air action programs plans in the country. So they want to see us as a good partner. We want to be there for a while, and we want to partner well. So we saw the writing on the wall, whether it's going to be regulatory, whether the customers demand it, whether our employees are going to be looking for it. All of those things demanded that we do something a little bit better and across the enterprise than what we were doing as a piecemeal approach. And that was why we made that change. And that's what sparked us to say, okay, let's take an whole of enterprise approach and develop a roadmap, et cetera. And that's where we set out the vision, the goals, and then establish my role and formalize some things.
And so I guess really adding on to that, once you kind of got started and the company started that journey, what were those first practical steps the team took to turn sustainability from really concept to action? And I think one of the areas that I find a lot through our conversations with customers is that challenge of prioritization, what to do, where to start, how to prioritize, and decide what's important. And so can you kind of take us through how the organization really thought through that and really took those steps?
Yeah, one of the things I love about Pasha and George, the family, et cetera, is the celebration in terms of accomplishments, like making sure that we actually take in the good and we celebrate the accomplishments. So my actual zero, if I had a batting order of things, my very first thing to do was accomplishments. Take stock of actually everything we've done as a company, because we didn't actually have a list anywhere, an inventory of what we actually accomplished, going back to, let's say, 2018 or something. So let's take a stock of what we've done and let's get a baseline. You can't project where you're going to go to unless you understand where you're at. Do you know what your greenhouse gas inventory is? Do you know what your energy profile is? If you don't know those things, then everything else you do is going to be pretty suspect, and you're probably not going to be tilting at the right things. So that's where it started for us, accomplishments and a baseline. And from there, that leads into benchmarking. You can benchmark against your peers, benchmark against industry averages or norms. You can use things like EcoVadis or CDP or other types of things to say, okay, how are we stacking up against other people in our industry or a sector? And then all of that helps drive some of the behavior. We understand where we're at. We understand where everyone else is at. We understand what people are starting to expect. We understand what our customers are asking us to do. We understand what's probably going to happen regulatorily. And so then we start saying, okay, this is the direction we need to move. And we start more aggressively setting out on some initiatives.
And from a materiality standpoint and the materiality assessment that you went through at the Pasha Group, how did that inform the prioritization efforts?
So a lot of companies will do a materiality assessment in the beginning of their sustainability journey. Some companies do, I've heard it called like a captain's call, a materiality assessment, where, essentially George said, he's worked in the business his whole life. He understands what the customers want. He understands what the industry is looking for. So he said, here's the priorities. So we started with our materiality assessment with essentially the CEO's materiality assessment, which is going to be pretty close because there's that tight relationship as a B2B business, and having good relationships, strong relationships with all the different businesses that we've had for a long time. So it's a good place to start. And then in 2024, we actually did a formal materiality assessment where we polled employees, we polled customers, we polled suppliers. We had an outstanding return rate. We had, I think, around 80% response rate, which was very good for the employee engagement. And for a lot of employees, they didn't even realize how much we'd actually been doing. And so that was eye-opening, but it was also good to get their perspective. And we did a double materiality assessment, again, sort of reading tea leaves and seeing where things are going to go. Maybe a DMA is, double materiality assessment is not required unless you're in the EU or something, but it will probably become the de facto standard. So we might as well just do that while we're doing it. So that was our first formal one in 24. And we used that to calibrate. If we thought we were going to do X, Y, and Z, maybe that new assessment said that we should be doing Z, X, and Y or something like that. And so we used that to calibrate 2025, 2026, and the next few years.
Fantastic. And that's all been used really to help with prioritizing, identifying, managing all those different key issues at the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we found was that the captain's call materiality assessment was pretty close. The things we'd already been working on as priorities were pretty close to where the materiality assessment, the formal one, landed. There were probably 2 or 3 things that were higher or lower than where we thought they were, and that's a good reason for doing it, because you want to get a pulse check on your customers, you want to get a pulse check on your employees, and you want to get a pulse check on the stakeholder groups where your company is operating. So.
Yes. It's critical, especially in the changing environment that we're in. Things are changing rapidly, priorities are changing rapidly, given all the different pressures coming in at the government level, at regulatory levels, customer level, and investor level, all these things. And so constantly being able to have data at hand to be able to make those decisions is critical in this day and age.
Yeah.
So moving into the integration side, so when you think about integration at the company, how have you embedded sustainability into the organization, whether it's operationally or from a strategic decision-making standpoint?
Yeah, we've done a little bit. We still got some more ground to cover, but we did establish like a bi-weekly executive team that was a sustainability and government affairs focused team. And so that was a place where we could talk about different initiatives at that executive leadership team level. We also created engagements with the business units. So if we want to talk about one terminal or one truck fleet, we actually started having monthly meetings with them to talk about, hey, what's going right? What do we want to celebrate? What's out there in communications? What are your customers specifically looking for? And what are things we can do at your facility? So all that started in late 2021, early 2022, as part of getting engagement. One of the things that we find is that very few people have training or familiarity with a lot of the sustainability topics. And it's also an evolving, business or industry, right? We're constantly learning new things, new science. There's also new technologies, new approaches. We're finding the efficacy for one approach may not be what we thought it was, and something else may be more, maybe better. So one of the things we're doing is trying to increase the fluency across the organization with sustainability pieces. We started a green team last year, and that team does monthly newsletters and monthly meetings, and they have a variety of topics around sustainability. And it's focused on personal home sort of sustainability, like what you can do as an individual in your private life. But we also mix in where, every job's a climate job, and how do you figure into that? So we're trying to make sure that people understand, as an accountant, how can you actually influence things? Or, you're somebody in the IT network operations department, how's your job effect? What can you do for sustainability? So early days still, to have it really embedded at a core level across the company, but we're starting. And the next step is vendor engagement. Start asking those vendors, start weighting their proposals based upon some of their sustainability performance, just like our customers are probably looking at us. And then that starts driving behavior.
And are you seeing, I think the communication around sustainability is so key. And I love the fact that you're doing the newsletters and the different groups around this. Are you seeing more that education and the communication and the awareness? Has that been increasing in the company? Or are you seeing more people being aware of everything that Pasha Group is doing around sustainability?
Yeah. There's a general awareness that's been increased. And one of the things we did is this year we started doing quarterly speaker series where we invite somebody in on a certain topic. And those have been very well attended. We'll have maybe 150, 180 people join the call live, and then other people can watch it, as a recording later. But that's a pretty heavy employee participation out of, maybe 600 or 700 full-time employees to have that many people making time to check in on whatever that topic is. So yeah, we're definitely seeing that the average, the rank and file are seeing that what we're doing. They're more familiar with it, and they approve of it. So.
And then on the kind of flip side of, the challenges around this, which are always a whole series of different challenges and obstacles that companies face with integration and implementing their roadmaps. What major challenges have you seen as through the journey, given that you were there on day one of building up the sustainability program and where we are today? Can you maybe talk about it, give a couple examples of those challenges that you've had?
Yeah, I think I would say there's probably two primary challenges. One is the financial ROI, right? Trying to understand what that value statement is to whatever that sustainability initiative is. There's still so many things that are early days. Pasha's participated in a couple of different grants where we've been on the technical advisory committees for heavy trucking, heavy duty trucking. And it's been really interesting where you have a company go in, they do 6 trucks, let's say one example. And after 1 year, they found that they were saving $100,000 per truck per year. And if they'd known that from the get-go, they would have done their whole fleet. But they didn't know that because we didn't really have a total cost of ownership and a real understanding of what the total cost was and the benefit. So it's still too new. There's not enough case studies, or people really don't understand, like, at a gut level, how beneficial this can be. So that financial ROI is a pretty big challenge, trying to make sure that it has some robustness, some truthiness to it, and that it justifies itself to make it commercially feasible. The other thing I'd say, Seth, is permitting. And in my worst case example, we have a battery energy storage system that we finished in 2017, and it is still not placed into service because of permitting, fire department, you name it, problems. So the standard for these things keeps changing. With every battery fire, there's a new requirement. But the permitting is very challenging because this is, again, new. So in some cases, they don't even have their codes correctly laid out, right? They might hold us accountable to a battery in a building when our battery's in a container or on the ground somewhere. Or they might have a standard that just doesn't match to what the type of enclosure that we were using. So that's a big issue, a big challenge for us. Getting the permitting design done, and then after you actually get it installed, getting it approved to place into service. With the company, if you look at the utility company, they want to make sure their local grid can handle what you're doing. That might trigger additional, studies. It's a lot of effort. So I think those are the two biggest barriers, just getting, especially renewable energy or microgrid or any type of energy projects into service, and that financial ROI.
Yeah, the financial ROI at Climate Week in New York a couple weeks ago, I would say, was probably the most prevalent topic, given what's been going on with the new administration and ultimately it's really influenced a lot of sustainability teams to say, hey, we need to get back to basics and we need to really think about all of these sustainability efforts. What kind of return am I getting? And I think ultimately that's going to create a more healthier industry and really help companies focus on what are those issues that actually you can get a return on. So, but to your point, still early days, and there's still a lot of gray areas around that. But I do think that that's a really important effort. All right, so as we wrap up here and look ahead, and Paige has been on this really incredible sustainability journey. What in your view, what excites you the most around where Paige is going, and what's next in the journey?
Yeah, I mentioned some of the challenges with clean energy projects and things like that. So we have 2 microgrid projects at 2 terminals that we've been working on for a little while, a year or 2 or 3, and I'm hoping that those come to fruition in 2026, or maybe in the end of this year, but really probably 2026. So seeing what that does and what we can do with it, and then actually pushing that even farther, that's exciting for me, because it's practical application of these things that actually also delivers business value. So that's one. So seeing some of those energy projects come together. I'm excited to see where trucks are going to go. We're still early days on trucks. The batteries don't really satisfy the long haul need, because of the weight challenges there. So, people talked about hydrogen trucks for a while, but nobody can buy any hydrogen, or whatever the problem is, or the hydrogen is not green, etc. But it feels like somebody's gonna crack that nut for real, and there'll be something that the industry can rally around, because we know that we need to do something. Doing nothing is not an option. So I'm excited to see what comes down that way. And I think just standardization in the shipping industry will be exciting to see, as people start to say, okay, this is basic stuff that every ship should have, and Paige is able to use some of those things. And we're currently doing a net greenhouse gas reduction project to see what all of our investments are going to yield. And I'm excited to see the end of that, because that will tell us what, based on decisions that were made, how much are we going to accomplish, and the capital the company's invested, where will that put us? And then how much is left to go to, let's say, trying to be carbon neutral or net zero or some other type of thing. But we've already invested hundreds of millions of dollars in new assets that are cleaner. Where does that get us? And then what's the next steps after that? So.
Fantastic. That was great, Kai. And, what an amazing journey that the company's been through. I learned so much today, and, as we wrap up here, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on today, sharing the story, hearing about your own career path and how you got in, became the chief sustainability officer at the company, and, what's next for Pasha Group. So thanks so much, and hope to have you on in the future, and hear what's the big updates at Pasha Group.
Well, thank you, Seth, for having me, and Socialsuite's been a great partner with us, and happy to talk with you.
Perfect.